The restaurant was glowing that night. The golden lights reflected off the glasses and polished tables, and soft chatter filled the air. It was one of those places where everything looked perfect, from the folded napkins to the smooth sound of the piano in the corner. Guests were dressed in fine clothes, laughing gently over their expensive meals, while waiters moved around like a well-trained orchestra. Among them was a young waitress, quiet and humble, always focused on her work. She wasn't the kind who liked attention. She moved carefully between tables, placing plates and pouring wine, always with a small, polite smile. Most of the staff didn't know much about her. She never talked about her life, never joined the others when they joked or gossiped during breaks. She simply worked, collected her tips, and left quietly when her shift ended. That evening was supposed to be special. A group of important guests had booked the best seats in the restaurant: a well-known businessman, a local newspaper critic, and a few wealthy regulars who expected nothing less than perfection. The restaurant's pianist was supposed to play throughout the evening, filling the air with smooth classical tunes. But as time passed, the manager's face turned pale. The pianist hadn't arrived. He checked his watch again and again, called his phone, but there was no answer. The guests were already seated, looking toward the piano expectantly. The silence in the room felt awkward. The manager wiped his forehead, whispering under his breath about how everything always went wrong at the worst possible moment. One of the waiters laughed and said, "Maybe she can play," pointing at the quiet waitress who was arranging plates at the back counter. Everyone laughed at once. Even the manager gave a nervous chuckle. The waitress looked up, confused. "Me?" she asked softly. "Yeah," one of the cooks teased. "You look like you could play some magic tunes, right?" The others laughed louder. The girl gave a small, shy smile. "I used to play a little," she said. Her voice was gentle, almost lost in the noise of the laughter. "A little?" another waiter repeated mockingly. "We need a real pianist, not a beginner." The manager sighed, not in the mood for jokes. "All right, enough," he said. "Let's focus on the tables. We'll just play some background music from the speakers. Hopefully no one complains." But just as he was about to walk away, one of the guests from the corner called out loudly, "What's going on? Where's the music?" The manager forced a smile and hurried to the table, explaining that their pianist was running late. The guest frowned. "Late? This place used to have class," he said. "Now it feels like a cafeteria." The manager's heart dropped. He turned around and looked at his staff in panic. "We need something," he whispered. "Anything?" Then he glanced at the quiet waitress again. "You said you can play a little?" he asked her. She hesitated. "It's been a long time," she said. "Well, if you think you can manage something, go ahead. But don't mess it up," he said quickly, half out of desperation. The other waiters exchanged amused looks, whispering behind their hands. "This is going to be funny," one of them murmured. The girl slowly wiped her hands on her apron, took a deep breath, and walked toward the piano. The soft sound of her shoes on the wooden floor seemed to echo in the suddenly quiet room. The guests turned to look at her. Some raised their eyebrows, surprised to see a waitress sitting down at the piano. A few of them even smiled mockingly, waiting to see what would happen. She sat on the bench, staring at the keys for a few seconds. Her hands trembled slightly. She could feel everyone's eyes on her. The guests, the staff, even the manager standing by the bar with crossed arms. The laughter from earlier still rang in her ears. For a moment, she almost stood up and walked away. But then she closed her eyes, took another slow breath, and placed her fingers gently on the keys. The first few notes were soft, unsure, like someone remembering an old language. A couple of waiters snickered quietly in the corner, but then something changed. Her fingers began to move faster, more confidently. The melody began to flow, delicate, deep, and full of emotion. The room slowly fell silent. The sound coming from the piano was not what anyone expected. It wasn't a simple tune. It was powerful and alive, with a beauty that reached straight into the heart. Her hands moved gracefully, each note connecting to the next like pieces of a story she had carried inside her for years. The laughter had stopped. Every guest, every waiter, even the manager, they all stood frozen. The critic, who had been sipping wine, slowly put his glass down, eyes wide. The businessman leaned forward, forgetting his meal completely. The sound filled the room like magic, smooth and emotional, rising and falling as if the piano itself was speaking. The waitress wasn't just playing, she was remembering. Every chord carried something from her past. Long nights practicing in a small room, a teacher's voice correcting her posture, the sound of applause she hadn't heard in years. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like a waitress. She felt like herself again, the girl who once dreamed of stages and music before life became about bills and long shifts. Her fingers danced across the keys faster now, her whole body swaying with the rhythm. The restaurant seemed to disappear. There was no chatter, no laughter, no sound except the piano's voice, gentle, fierce, alive. When the final note rang out, it lingered in the air for a long, breathless moment. The silence that followed was heavy, but not empty. It was the kind that comes after something extraordinary. Then, one by one, people began to clap. Slowly at first, then louder, until the whole restaurant was filled with applause. Some guests even stood up. The critic looked amazed, whispering something to the person beside him. The manager blinked, still trying to process what he had just witnessed. The waitress looked down at her hands, breathing heavily. A small smile formed on her face. She stood, gave a polite nod, and quietly walked back toward the counter. Her coworkers moved aside as she passed, their earlier smirks completely gone. No one said a word. They just watched her, the same woman they had laughed at only minutes before. The critic turned to the manager. "Who is she?" he asked. The manager hesitated. "Just one of our waitresses," he said softly, still staring at the piano. The critic shook his head, amazed. "No," he said quietly. "That's not just a waitress." And for the rest of the night, nobody laughed again. The sound of her music seemed to stay in the air, like a memory that refused to fade. The applause kept echoing through the restaurant long after the waitress had finished playing. Some guests even looked around as if they were waking from a dream. The sound of the piano still hung in the air, soft and haunting, like it didn't want to leave. The manager stood frozen near the bar, his mouth slightly open, not knowing what to say or do. The waitress walked quietly back to her place, trying to hide the blush on her face. She didn't look at anyone. Her hands were still shaking, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from relief. She had done something she never thought she would do again. For a few moments, the entire restaurant stayed silent. Then one of the guests broke into a louder round of clapping, and soon everyone joined in again. People smiled at her, nodded, in respect, and even the critic, the man known for his sharp tongue, was clapping with a genuine smile. The manager rushed to her side, still looking stunned. "That was unbelievable," he said softly. "Where did you learn to play like that?" The waitress gave a small smile. "A long time ago," she said simply. "I used to play when I was younger." The manager blinked, unsure how to respond. "You mean you were trained?" She nodded gently. "I studied music. I wanted to be a pianist. But life took me somewhere else." He didn't know what to say after that. He just looked at her with quiet respect. The same staff members who had laughed earlier now stood with lowered eyes. A few of them whispered small apologies under their breath, but she didn't seem angry. She only smiled and went back to work, clearing a table as if nothing special had happened. That night changed the mood of the entire restaurant. The guests were softer, kinder. People tipped generously, and some even stopped her to say thank you for the music. The critic called the manager aside before leaving and said, "That girl has real talent. You should tell her not to waste it." When the restaurant finally closed and everyone began cleaning up, the manager found her sitting quietly near the piano, staring at the keys. "You really were amazing tonight," he said. She looked up and smiled faintly. "Thank you," she said. "I didn't think I could still play like that." He tilted his head. "Why did you stop?" Her eyes softened, as if she were remembering something distant. "I used to perform when I was young. I studied hard. My dream was to travel and play for people. But after my father passed away, I had to take care of my family. Music didn't pay the bills, so I found a job, and one day became another, until the piano became just a memory." The manager nodded slowly. He didn't know what to say. There was a quiet sadness in her words, but also something peaceful, as if she had made peace with her choices. Before leaving that night, the critic posted a small video clip of her performance online. He wrote only one line. Sometimes the greatest talent hides behind the simplest uniforms. By morning, the video had already spread beyond the small town. People began sharing it, amazed by the way a waitress had played with such grace and emotion. The comments were filled with praise. Some called her a hidden genius. Others said her music had made them cry. When the waitress came to work the next day, she didn't know what was waiting for her. The manager was already smiling when she walked in. "You need to see this," he said, holding out his phone. Her eyes widened when she saw the video. Millions of views, thousands of comments. "Is this really me?" she whispered, unable to believe it. "It's you," he said. "You went viral overnight." The other staff gathered around her, this time not to laugh but to cheer. "You're famous now," one of them said. "You're going to be on TV." She smiled shyly, still unsure how to feel. "I didn't do it for fame," she said softly. "I just wanted to help." Over the next few days, people began visiting the restaurant not just for the food, but to see her. Guests would ask politely if she could play again, and though she was shy at first, she agreed. Every evening after finishing her shift, she sat at the piano and played a few pieces. Each time, the room filled with silence and emotion. People recorded her, clapped, and sometimes even cried. Her story reached a local music school, and soon she was invited to perform at a small community concert. At first, she hesitated. She hadn't performed on stage in years, but the manager encouraged her. "You reminded everyone here that dreams don't die," he told her. "They just wait for the right time." The night of the concert arrived. The hall was small but full of people. She sat at the piano, hands trembling again, but this time with excitement. When she played, the audience listened as if every note told a part of her life, the struggle, the loss, the quiet courage. When she finished, the applause was overwhelming. After the show, an old music teacher approached her and said, "Your playing comes from the heart. Don't stop again." Her eyes filled with tears. "I won't," she promised. From that day on, she began playing regularly, sometimes at the restaurant, sometimes at small events, sometimes even online. Her music began touching people everywhere. She received messages from strangers saying her story had inspired them to chase their forgotten dreams again. The same restaurant where she once served tables now introduced her as their in-house pianist. The manager even placed a small plaque near the piano that read, "Once a waitress, now a legend." But she never let fame change her. She still greeted everyone with the same humble smile. She still helped her coworkers. She still cleaned the tables when needed. The only difference was that now, everyone looked at her with admiration instead of laughter. One evening, as she finished a soft tune, a young girl came up to her. "I want to play like you one day," the girl said shyly. The waitress smiled and gently placed her hand on the girl's shoulder. "Then promise me one thing," she said. "Never stop believing in what you love, even if the world laughs at you." The girl nodded, eyes shining, and ran back to her parents. The waitress watched her go, smiling softly. That moment meant more to her than all the applause she had received. As the restaurant lights dimmed and the night grew quiet, she sat at the piano one last time before leaving. She ran her fingers gently across the keys, playing a tune only she knew, a song of gratitude, of rediscovered hope. She thought about how everything had changed. Not because she had sought attention, but because she had found the courage to be herself again. Life had taken her away from music once, but destiny had brought her back in the most unexpected way. The people who once laughed at her now told her story with pride. The same piano that once felt like a stranger was now her home again. And though she still wore the same uniform, she knew that her spirit no longer belonged to the shadows. That night, as she left the restaurant, the soft sound of the piano still echoed in the empty room, a reminder that true talent never fades. It only waits for the moment when courage opens the door again. And somewhere, someone new was watching. That old video online, feeling a spark of inspiration, whispering to themselves, "Maybe it's not too late for me either." Because sometimes the most beautiful music comes from those who were once silenced, and when they finally play, the world listens.